Hey guys, it's Corey from Redefining Strength, and today I want to talk about glute activation. What is it? What moves are important to do? Why do you need to do it? So glutes are a very sexy subject right now. Whether or not we want a perkier butt, a bigger butt, a smaller butt, whether or not we want to prevent injury, run faster, lift more, our glutes are something we're talking about working. And they're a very important muscle group, whether or not you want to make aesthetic changes or whether or not you do want to prevent injury and lift more and run faster. They're a big powerhouse, and there are actually three gluteal muscles, the glute maximus, medius, and minimus. Today I'm really going to talk about activating and strengthening the glute max and the glute med because the min sort of functions a little bit more in conjunction with some of our hip flexors. So we want to strengthen these things to strengthen our hip extension, strengthen our hip abduction, external rotation as well. So when we're talking about glute activation, this isn't the squats, it isn't the deadlifts, it isn't those big compound movements that we really think of. We hear squat for a better butt all the time, but those squats only really pay off as much as we're actually able to activate our glutes during those movements. And that comes down to not only our movement patterns, but also our recruitment patterns. And that's why glute activation can be so key. We spend so much time, seated in forward flexion, hunched over our computers, driving in our cars, that we need to do some of these things to open up our hips, to get our glutes activated, because they're not functioning optimally. When we're talking about activation and underactive glutes, it's not that our glutes aren't working on a day-to-day basis. You wouldn't be able to stand if they weren't. However, that doesn't mean that a muscle is recruited as efficiently and as effectively as it possibly should, because there might be other muscles that are tight and overactive. In this case, our hip flexors. So we're talking about glute activation, we're restoring that proper mind-body connection, which might have been disrupted due to our postural distortions from our day-to-day activities, and it might have also been sort of distorted due to injuries and imbalances that we have. If you've ever had an ankle injury, a knee injury, a hip injury, even a low back injury, that might have disrupted the communication between that muscle, the glutes, or the muscle group, and your brain. So we want to restore that proper mind-body connection with activation. So the benefits of activation is that you're going to get more out of those compound movements. When you squat, when you do those hip hinge movements and those compound movements that are working more muscle groups at once, by doing the activation prior, you're going to have established that mind-body connection. Because when you do heavy squats and heavy deadlifts, you can't focus on those muscles working during them. You have to sort of focus on actually lifting the weight. When you're trying to sprint, you can't focus on what you feel working. You have to sprint, you have to perform. So by doing the activation, you've established that mind-body connection prior so you can get more out of those movements. Plus, by doing the activation, what we're doing is we're strengthening our glute medius, we're strengthening our glute max. You can do activation for a lot of other muscle groups as well, but we're even going to improve our hip stability, which can help with balance. So as we get older and we might struggle to balance, we have more falls, doing movements like this can really help us improve our balance so that we stay stronger, more coordinated, more agile even as we get older. So talking about the benefits, what it is these small isolated movements. So when we think about glute activation, we're thinking about using really light resistances, even body weight. We're thinking about higher reps. We're not going for max loads. While we do want to progress movements, it's these smaller muscle groups, these smaller movements that we're working, and we're using lighter loads with higher volume, We're going for more of that pump and that burn over trying for a max effort, So 5 of my favorite moves to use, and the first one is a mini band glute bridge. So you're going to place the mini band right below your knees. You can also place it right above. I get asked, which is harder? And while you want to challenge yourself, really it's not so much about which is harder, but more about the further down the body the mini band goes, the more muscles that can sort of try and compensate and engage instead of just your glutes. I highly recommend, especially as I've gotten more experience with some of these things, putting it right below or right above your knees, If it's light resistance, you can go right below your knees. If it's a little bit heavier, maybe right above, especially if it's the booty band. But so to do the glute bridge with mini band, you're gonna press out on the band, You're gonna drive your elbows into the ground. You're gonna drive your knees towards your toes as you lift up. You're really gonna squeeze your butt to drive your hips into extension. Then you'll lower back down, Do not let your knees cave in. The benefits of the band is that it's actually going to also engage your glute medius, which can then help your glute max fire better, If you really struggle to activate your glutes, by adding in the mini band and that extra tension, it can sometimes make it easier. When we think about activation too, it's not only restoring that mind-body connection to those muscles, but especially with movements like the bridge, when we talk about unlocking our hips or relaxing tight hip flexors, if you think about this movement and when you drive into extension, even using that posterior pelvic tilt to help prevent your low back and to engage your abs a little bit, you're actually extending your hips. So through reciprocal inhibition, you're firing your glutes to help your hips relax. So especially when you're short on time, doing some of these activation movements that can actually help stretch can be really beneficial. You're getting a 2 for 1. Another great mini band move, and I even recommend sometimes for this one that you put it above your knees a little bit, it can help hold it in place, is the clam. So the clam is a very standard movement we see done. However, it's also a movement I see so often butchered and doesn't get the benefit that it really should, or it doesn't give you the benefit it really should. So when you do clams, think about rotating the top toe in, even turning it down to the ground, okay? When we see people doing clams, we see all this rotation, especially if you've had piriformis issues or even TFL issues. A lot of times this can only perpetuate that pain instead of actually helping correct it, which is why you're usually using this move in the first place. So put your hand here, you can even put your butt against the wall, and then think about pushing your hips forward. Instead of thinking about rotating open as much as you can, think about squeezing your butt forward to push your knee open. Okay, when you do that and you turn the toe down, you can actually get that glute medius working a lot better and not let those other muscles compensate. Again, none of this is about heavy loads. It's about increasing the volume. It's about increasing the time under tension even, but it's about feeling that muscle work. So if you're doing this movement and you don't feel the muscle working, pause for a second, hold it under tension, okay? And then relax back down. Pause and hold, but use that time under tension, and sometimes you have to do a few more reps if you're not good at activating the muscle to get it to activate. Sometimes the more efficient you are and the better your mind-body communication, the quicker you get it to activate without even adding any load. Okay, so I love those two movements, the mini band glute bridge and the mini band clams. You can also use a booty band for both as well. Another old standard is the donkey kick. And I'm gonna show this off my forearms because a lot of times people will be like, I can't do the quadrant moves, my wrists hurt. So one of my favorites to go to is the forearm version. This also allows for a lot less movement of the core in general because you're so low and close to the ground. So what you're just gonna do is simply kick the foot back up towards the ceiling. You can kick slightly out more, you can kick slightly back more. Just make sure that as you start to bring the heel back towards the butt a little bit more, you're not engaging your hamstring instead, okay? So kicking straight up, squeezing the butt, really engaging, not leaning away, but squeezing that butt, not just kicking up higher to arch your low back, but almost stopping the movement with your glute and then lowering back down. And again, you can kick a little bit more out if you need, or you can even curl the butt or the heel in towards the butt, but make sure you're not feeling the hamstring compensate. And then go slow and pause, okay? If you do want to add a little resistance, you can use the mini band. You can also add an ankle weight. But again, your focus isn't on adding more weight. Yes, you need to progress movements, but it's on feeling the right muscle working, which again, the more advanced you are, often the more you can feel it with just your own body weight because you're efficient at creating that communication. So next move, reverse hyper, okay? This is a very basic move, and I know sometimes when I lay down, you can't hear me as well. So you're gonna lie face down, and this is gonna work on hyperextension of your hips. So you want to work in every plane of motion to strengthen your glutes because they perform a lot of different joint actions, okay, working all together. That is the basic reverse hyper, okay? So you're gonna think you can turn your toes out, bring your heels together, so you can do a little bit more external rotation. However, be careful with this if you've had piriformis issues in the past. You can also have your feet straight on. If you tend to externally rotate and that does irritate your piriformis, even internally rotating your toes amazingly can help, okay? And again, you can add the mini band around. When you do this, think about driving your hips down into the bench. Think about lifting to about parallel. A lot of times we'll let our low back engage because people will lift their legs up too high, so like this. Okay, so they'll fling their legs up instead of thinking about pushing their hips down and almost stopping the movement with their glutes. So to demo that again, and really pause to assess. Make sure you're pressing your hip bones down into the bench as you do that, okay? But working on hyperextension. Another great lateral movement or abduction movement to work that glute medius, because a strong glute medius helps the glute max fire better, also creates hip stability. You know, if you have knee valgus, your knees cave in, you had ankle injuries in the past, you want to work at that glute medius, is the sort of the bench donkey kick, or sorry, the bench fire hydrant, not donkey kick. Looks like a dog peeing on a fire hydrant. Okay, so lifting up to the side. When you do this, the nice thing about the bench is it gives us that little bit of extra range of motion, okay, be a little more comfortable, but when you're doing it, don't lean away, okay, don't sink into that side. Think about kicking out to the side, and you can even add an ankle weight if you need, okay, but lifting straight out. Those are 5 great basic moves. Guys, they might seem simple, but these simple movements are so important to establishing that mind-body connection before we go do our other fun workout moves or before we go run, okay? Don't forget the basics. There are a foundation, there are fundamentals. If you need some routines to do so that you can get those glutes activated using these fundamental moves, check out my booty burner. Hope this video helped explain a little bit more about the purpose of glute activation and even some moves to get you started.